Tomorrow, on the 25th of May, is the 5-year anniversary of the murder of George Floyd. I thought that this would be a good time, as good a time as any, to recommend some books by black authors all about racism, the racial divide, and talking about their lives living under racism in the Western world. This is going to be split up into a few different sections of different types of books. They will be timestamped along the bottom, so if you only like to read memoirs, biographies, non-fictions, fantasy books or classics, they will all be shown down below for you and you can go and see what section is best for you to get a recommendation. I'm going to be starting off with probably the main section of this video, and that is going to be the books that are written by black authors about racism as a non-fiction work. There's a couple. First up is Hood Feminism by Mikki Kendall. So obviously this is tackling two topics at once. Black women are probably the most prejudiced group in the West, having received both misogyny and sexism combined and then multiplied by many different ways. So this is a really important book for any feminists out there, but also just to read as an anti-racism text about how black women are treated, why they are treated this way, and the impact that this has on them that is so very different to the impacts that are had on white women from sexism for them. Hello. I thought this one was an important read and I'm very glad I did pick it up. In Natives by Akala, he talks about the impact in Britain of racism and how this impacts the societal, historical and political infrastructure of Britain, but also how it impacted his life personally. He was a very intelligent young boy. I'm sure he's a very intelligent man, but he was a very intelligent young boy, but growing up black, people assumed where he would end up in life and therefore did not give him the chances that they should have done and put him where he could have been if he'd been white instead. And it's talking about how this impacts so many people across the United Kingdom. Again, another very good read. Sticking with Britain, I did try, and specifically when I was looking for anti-racist texts to read myself, I did try and look for ones set primarily in Britain. A lot of them are written and based in the United States, which I completely understand, especially reading in English. However, I do like to read about my own shitty little island and learn the things wrong with it, not just wrong with the United States. So this is British by Afua Hirsch, and this is talking about the colonialism situation here in the UK and why we deny so much of it. We like to pretend like, oh, well, we abolished slavery, we abolished the slave trade, we did this, we did that, and yet, as was shown in the riots in 2020, we still had statues to slavers up and streets named after them. We refunded the people who lost their enslaved folks because of the ruling, and we didn't finish paying them back until like 2015. I'm only 28 and I paid taxes, so I own I didn't start paying taxes until I was late teens, and I have paid taxes that have went towards people whose families formerly owned enslaved people. I have paid for that. What the fuck? What the fuck? So this has a lot of really important discussions, obviously with us kind of setting up a lot of the states. Obviously France and Spain did a lot of that too, and the Netherlands, but we did a lot of setting up in the States, which also then impacted the slavery in the United States and how people were enslaved and tortured essentially. So it is a good look into this, and it really talks about also the imperial past and why we ignore it and why we think we're better than that, despite the fact that so many people in this country are racist. Shut up, Abby, it's a deep dive. I recommend. Another British focused one, and this is Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race by Reni Eddo-Lodge. This one was a massive hit when it came out, hugely viral, so you've most likely heard of it. It is a great read. It explores race relations in Britain today and how, despite the fact that things are supposedly better, there is still a massive lack of understanding from white people as to what has happened to black people in the United Kingdom and how this has racially had impacts and still does, from the schools you can go to, the jobs you get, everything like that is in here. I didn't realise just how much of this was British, which is a good thing, but I didn't realise. This is another one by a British author, but it is just science, and so uses a lot of US studies, so if you're American this one may be more for you. And that is The Science of Racism by Keon. This one came out this year on the 23rd of January. This year? Yes. And this is all about the science of racism. This is literally looking at studies who are designed to have no bias in them, obviously, but they're designed to have no bias, they are designed to overcome that, they are designed to be anonymous, to not trick anyone, and it just looks at the pure data. and Keon West goes through and talks about talking points from a lot of people who say that racism isn't an issue, and he looks at them and he goes, well, this study says it's an issue with this, this and this. I will say that this did get to be quite repetitive. Certain studies and certain discussion points, for example employment, were mentioned repeatedly, and whilst I understand the importance of honing in and making that point heard, by like the 5th time I was like, yes, I do understand this, you've mentioned the study a few times. However, it is still very important despite the repetition, and it's a really good one for literally saying, well, here's the data. You're going to be racist and claim X, Y and Z, well, here is the data that proves that is wrong, that you are wrong, and that science and data and the real world says that this is happening. So, a great read. And then one for those of us who believe that we aren't racist, How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram x Kendi. Now, I personally would love to say that I'm not racist. In a more deep dive into the topic, I am. Everybody is, because of societal racism and the assumptions that are put in. It takes a lot of work to be anti-racist, and that is what this book is trying to get you to do. So this is more of a deep dive. This is a little bit more into things if you've already read a bit more about racism in multiple different countries, and it's talking about what you can actively do to be anti-racist rather than just not racist. Because if there's a Nazi at a table and 7 other people, there are 8 Nazis at that table. So we need to not be racist. You get me? So that is what this book is about. It's not too difficult, it's actually fairly basic, but it really does kind of push the points into the forefront of your mind and make you actually think about what you're doing and make you, hopefully, actively anti-racist. Then there are 2 biographies that I want to point out. So the first one is written by a white woman, however I do feel like it went into a lot of depth and is a good starting point for research into the woman that she's talking about, and that is the book The Immortal Life of Henrietta by Rebecca Skloot. If you've done any sort of biology in school or in college or university, then you will have heard of HeLa cells. They are the cells that allow us to create vaccinations and inoculations, as well as do cancer research and more. These cells were taken from Henrietta Lacks without her permission nor her knowledge, have been used to generate massive financial gain, and until very recently none of that financial gain went to her nor her descendants and her family. This is a little old now because of course that has changed slightly and they have been able to get some money. I believe it was published in 2010 originally, so it is 15 years out of date. However, it does still give a very well-informed background into Henrietta Lacks, who she was as a woman, what her life was like, and then what the doctors took from her without her knowledge and then used for their own financial and medical gain. A lot of us are alive because of her and we don't even know it. The vaccinations that we've had have been developed against her cells, and for all we know, if we hadn't had those vaccinations, we might not be here. So every human on Earth essentially owes their life to her, and she did not know, and her family had no financial compensation. So this is a really important book. Again, it's a good starting point with it being written by a white woman. It's best then, once you've read this, to look a little bit more into works that are by black people rather than a white woman, but I do feel like she handled it as sensitively as a white woman could. So this is a very well written book. And then we have Hidden Figures by Margot Shetterly. I still need to watch the film, but this was amazing. This is so amazing. If you have seen the film, this is very different. It does not read as narratively as the film does. It's very much just telling you what each of these women did in their lives, and they did so much. They did so much. They were there before NASA was NASA. They were incredible computers, and these women deserved to be recognised, and I'm glad that the film Hidden Figures at least pushed them a little bit more into the limelight. If you don't know, this is a group of black women who were used as computers. The term originally essentially meant mathematicians, essentially, who were doing calculations, and they were paid less than the white women who were then paid less than the men, and they did calculations that were incredibly important to a vast amount of NASA's work, but even the moon landing and different liftoffs and various different aspects. Without these women, it wouldn't have happened. They were incredibly intelligent and incredibly overlooked. So this is another fantastic one. Then we have 4 memoirs or self-written works. This first one I feel is the least known of the 3, so I'll talk about this one first. Between Starshine and Clay. This is Conversations from the African Diaspora with a foreword by Bernardine Evaristo and edited by Sarah Ladipo Manyika. This one is just some fantastic conversations with some really great minds from the Black diaspora and the African diaspora. It includes Toni Morrison, Claudia Rankine, Zoliswa Sithole, Wole Soyinka, Henry Louis Gates Jr., Margaret Busby, Anna Devery Smith, Willard Harris, Michelle Obama, Michael Hastings, Evan Maria, and Cory Booker. So there's a lot of voices in here, and it's just discussions with them, and I really enjoyed that and enjoyed learning more about these people. Then a memoir that is a little bit different, and that is Pulling the Chariot of the Sun by Shay McCrae, and this is a poet primarily writing a novel, but it's very clearly inspired by the poetry writing style, about his childhood. He was half black, half white, with a white mother, and his maternal grandparents actually stole him from his mum so that he would have no influence and no link to his black father. And so he grew up knowing he was different, but with no kind of clue to his racial identity. And then two that are definitely more well known. First up we have Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. This is a South African comedian who is very popular in the United States, and he is actually half black, half white also. However, in the South Africa at the time, that was literally illegal. But obviously there were a lot of people who were mixed race at this time. People have always disavowed these stupid racial rules, and so it's his life growing up coloured, which was the term at the time, rather than being black or white. This is obviously funny because he's a comedian, but it's also insightful, it is thought-provoking, and I just really enjoyed this memoir. And then also in South Africa, a bit of a bigger book though, and that is Long Walk to Freedom by Nelson Mandela. This is his memoir. It is big. However, and I mention this every time I talk about it, I read this one day because I don't know why the tabs aren't there for the beginning, but I read this, and I read this, and then I read this entire section in one day. It's very readable. And this is everything about his life, from his childhood, from then his tribal area being like taken over and him being taken into a city, him then fighting for the rights of the black South African people who are there originally, how he was put in prison, all of it, everything. This is very well written, he's a very good writer, but also so in-depth. I can't recommend this enough. I know it's a big book, but if you can handle that, it is so worth every second you will put into this book. And like I said, I couldn't put it down once I hit that point. There aren't many classics that I personally have on my shelves that are written by black authors. There is one that is written by a mixed race author, but doesn't talk too much about race, and that is The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. But if you have read this, there you go, you may not have known that he was actually fathered by a woman who was enslaved in the Caribbean, or she was the daughter of someone who was enslaved over there, and then went over to France and ended up writing many books, including The Three Musketeers and The Count of Monte Cristo. So that is one author, but he doesn't specifically talk about racism, that's not the point of the book. Whereas these two books, that is the point. Thanks to Hannah from letter M. Yes, I will mention this every time, woman, it is your fault. I will call things classics when they are not technically classics. This book was originally published in 1929, so I don't know if that counts as a classic yet, because it's almost 100 years ago, but if not, it's a modern classic. And this one is Passing by Nella Larsen. This is, well, the title should tell you what it's about, considering what this video is about. This is all about a black woman who is perceived and is light-skinned enough that she can pass as white, and her family who does not and or chooses not to, and the differences in the way that their lives go, how people treat them, and what happens to them. It is obviously a really important novel because this actually did happen. It was turned into a film, so if you do want to watch it you can do rather than reading the book, but it is a short little one, and I thought it was really well done and really showed just how stupid racism is, because these people were just as black as each other, but one of them looked a little less black, and so therefore got a huge amount of privilege. It's so stupid. But it really shows that, it shows the impact that that can have on a person internally, and also the impact that it can have on their entire life trajectory. So, a very important read. And one that is more about colonialism, and that is Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. This is a Nigerian author writing about the colonisation of that area of West Africa that is now called Nigeria. Obviously it was carved up by white people, so And it's talking about the loss of the culture that was there at the time, the loss of the community and the traditions that were then instead taken over by Christianity, so of course the loss of their own religion and their own belief system too. And just the huge negative impact that this had. So these two are both nice and short, so they're not too difficult to get into, and I do recommend both of them. They both have a lot to tell in their few number of pages. Whilst we're talking about racism, there are just a few books that I would like to highlight that are not by black authors but do discuss racism. So we have two from Palestinian authors. This one is fairly obvious as to why it has a discussion about racism. We have The Eyes of Gaza by Plestia Al-Akwad, and we have We Are Not Numbers, edited by Ahmed Al-Nouk and Pam Bailey. These are all, I say all, this is a collection of writing, these are all writings from young people who are living through the genocide, and obviously there is a racial motivator for the genocide, so I highly recommend reading these. Then there's actually a kids book by Sathnam Sanghera. I do need to pick up his adult non-fiction work, but I haven't read Empire Land yet. This is Stolen History, and it's actually very good. I recommend, despite the fact that it's intended for children. Sanghera is a British Indian author, and he's writing all about colonialism across the world from the British Empire and what they did, why they did it, and what impact it had. Obviously, as I said, this is aimed at children, so it is a little light on the atrocities. However, it is very good at explaining what happened. It doesn't skim over them, it's just written appropriately for children. It does still inform them about what happened, and I actually think this is amazing. It's obviously really quick for an adult to get through as well, so I know it's a kids book, but just trust me on this one. This is so well written, so well researched. It's got those funny little moments that are intended to keep kids engaged. I think that this is a fantastic book, all on British colonialism and the destruction that my people wrought on the world. And then last for this little section, and that is Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. And I thought I'd mention this one because she is a biologist who is also Indigenous American, and I think that the way that she talks about the knowledge of the Indigenous people and how it can actually be mixed in with Western science is really useful, really should be taken into account, but hasn't been because racism. So that's just a quick flying look over at 4 books that are not by black authors but do tackle racism, and I think they were worth mentioning. But obviously this video is primarily focused on black authors, which is why this is like maybe less than 10% of the books. Then to end this video out, I thought it would be good to look at some science fiction fantasy books on this topic. So if this is more your jam, if you're really not into reading non-fiction or classics, then this is something that you can read that will educate you as well. There are a number here, and 3 of them are by the same author because I couldn't resist. So I'm going to start with them. That author is Rivers Solomon, and I adore them. My favourite book last year was by them, and it was Sorrowland. This is about a young black woman who escapes a cult and attempts to reintegrate into society, and the racism that is an issue there, as well as dealing with the trauma of coming out of a cult. And she also gave birth and has twins. There's a lot in this book, and it's so well written. The book that you have probably heard of by them though is The Deep, and this was inspired by a song, so I recommend you listen to that also. But this is about black mermaids who were, to simplify, created when black enslaved folks were thrown overboard on the slave ships because there was too many people there, and they just decided to kill them by throwing them overboard. And some of the women who they threw overboard were pregnant, and they then became these mermaids. It is a heart-wrenching story about remembering your history whilst also not allowing the horror of it to consume you as a person and the difficulty of that. It is a very short story, and this is known and loved for a reason. And then the last Rivers Solomon book, and this is a sci-fi, and that is An Unkindness of Ghosts. I was about to say by Rivers Solomon, really. And this one we are following a young autistic woman on a spaceship. This book not only talks about our main character's autism, but it also discusses a lot of things that are still happening to black people, especially in the United States. Sharecropping, and basically treated as though you are in enslavement even though you are supposedly free. That happens on this ship. I was going to call it a boat. And it talks about how, despite the fact that she is incredibly intelligent, this is stifled and not used because of the colour of her skin. And again, once again, Rivers Solomon, favourite author. I need to pick up more from this author. Okay, then into the last 3, who are all different authors. First up we have Akwe Emezi, and they have written many books, and I've read quite a few of them, but I'm going with Pet here. This is a YA book, and it is all about racism. We follow a young girl named Jam, and it turns out that there are monsters loose in the city, and she ends up making friends with one and calling it Pet. And Before that, the city was supposed to be perfect. There was nothing bad anywhere. But there was beforehand, and it turns out that her parents and her elders had worked very hard to get people to this point. It's the story of that and how this impacts the later generations, and how you can think that all the monsters have been removed, but there will still be people there. A high fantasy one this time, and that is The Blood Gift by N.E. Davenport. This is all about a world where they have a Roman-style army that you're conscripted into, and they are like super tough and they kill loads of people, and one of our main characters, well, our main character, her name Ikenna, ends up not being able to progress as she should have been because of the colour of her skin. And it has an impact on everything, on how she is treated, on what her culture is supposed to be, on where her place is in the society, despite the fact that she is incredibly strong. It's really good. This is a brilliant duology. And then last but never ever least is the Noughts and Crosses series by Malorie Blackman. This, if you haven't heard of it somehow, this was old news when I was a kid. When was this published? Like, first published in 2001. I was 4. So this is an oldie for YA, but a goodie. To summarise this in the most basic sense, we have just 2 races, white and black, and they are swapped societally from what we have today. So black people are considered superior, they are the majority, they are the standard, and white people are considered inferior and are judged because of the colour of their skin, denied education opportunities, and treated as lesser than, often being given jobs in housework and the more menial tasks rather than being allowed to use their intellect. This series also has like a Romeo and Juliet style situation in it, and really just breaks your fucking heart. There are multiple books in it. There are 4 main books and then there are extra ones after it. I've read the 4 main ones twice. I read them as a kid and I read them younger than I probably should have, and then I read them again as an adult a couple of years ago. I personally cannot deal with reading any more of this series, so I haven't read the other 2 books that have been published. Don't sue me. I can't. Malorie Blackman is an incredible writer. She is so deserving of any titles you've ever heard anyone give her. She's absolutely fantastic. Her writing is engrossing, evocative, very well done, very well researched, and this series, if you've somehow missed it, is known for a reason. And those are just a few book recommendations for remembering and learning and educating yourself. Of course, this should be done year round, not just Black History Month in the US or Black History Month in the UK. They're at different times if you wonder why. We shout about them at different moments. And also not just when we are remembering the murder of somebody because of their race. This should be done all year round. I have been reading these all year round and for many years now. You should be too, and I hope that this is just a good instigator for you to pick up a few more books for your TBR. Please do let me know down below if there are any other books that I am desperately missing from this list. I do have some others on my TBR, but there are also some that are just on the mental TBR of ones I'd like to buy, so please do let me know if I need to add any to my shelves. Toot sweet. Why is that the way I thought of saying that? Thank you so much for watching, folks, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!